Welcome. I'm Pamela Riccia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Anna Brown. Hi, Anna.
Hello.
I am really, really happy to have Anna back on the podcast because I always love her perspective and her insights around unschooling. So that's especially why I'm excited for this episode, because what I want to tackle is defining unschooling, which really, really isn't an easy thing to do, which is why there's so much conversation around it and has been forever. Now, that said, right, I am not thinking or talking about trying to come up with a short and snappy definition, right? There isn't one because it's such a rich thing and it turns into a lifestyle, et cetera. But what I want to do is add some context to the conversation by comparing and contrasting unschooling with some of the other alternative education options that are out there and some of the other terms that kind of get tossed around as unschooling as well. And none of this is in a better or worse kind of way. I love that the alternative education options out there are growing. I love that people are having more choices. But talking about the differences between them with an eye to helping parents make more informed choices around whether or not unschooling might be a great fit for their families. That's what I'm trying to do with this conversation. So speaking about choices, I do think the most, or at least one of the most fundamental and helpful shifts for all parents to make is the realization that our children's education is our choice. Yeah, I remember when my kids were going to school, when I had never heard of unschooling, I said, this isn't an option. And that was part of, let's figure out a way to make this work for us, having to go to school, right? It wasn't until I realized there was a choice that the whole world opened up all of a sudden. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, because when we understand that their education is a choice, everything does open up, doesn't it? It's not just about school or no school. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, if I can question something as fundamental as that, the whole world opens up, doesn't it?
I think so, because I think we tend to, maybe human nature, just kind of follow these conventional paths that have been laid out in front of us because, well, it's working, it seems to be fine. And I think what we found as, both kind of leaders in our communities, I had so many people coming to me, there was a precipitous event, it's not working for their child, whatever. And they're throwing their hands up. I don't know what to do, but this isn't working. And then they see that choice piece, and then once you see that choice piece, there is this whole world and it's there, it's been there, but most of us just aren't aware of it. And so I think that is that first step to, okay, we don't have to do this. And of course, every once in a while, you still hear that person like, oh, is that okay? You don't have to do that, but more and more, certainly over the 20 some years that we've been doing it, it's changed. I think it's more commonplace. You have much more resources, the internet and everything has helped all of those pieces be more at the forefront. But yeah, that's the first step. We've got a choice. What works for our family? What works for my kids?
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we started, I'd never even heard of homeschooling. Nobody I knew was doing it. I only found, it online. And it's like, oh, there are people that do this. And, checked, we're in Ontario, Canada, checked the legalities of it, et cetera, found out how to pull them from school. But it was like this whole world opened up. And as you were saying, now I can say homeschooling. Like back then, if I mentioned homeschooling, is that legal? It was like 95% of the time, that was the first question, right?
Yeah.
But now most people have heard the term, I was mentioning, more and more alternative education options are starting to show up. So it is really cool that way. But yeah, as you said, I think the most fundamental piece is now that we have the choice, we can really start, instead of trying to help our families fit into the system that we think we have to, now we can look at our families first and see what might work better for us. And you know what? That may even change over the years as circumstances change, as people change. But that's the wonderful thing. Once you realize you have a choice, like you can't take that back, right?
No.
Once you have that realization, even if you choose school, how you look at school is different now, right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's very cool. Okay, so now let's dive into some terminology because often it's helpful to choose different words to describe what we do, depending on the circumstances, right? Depends on who we're talking to, whether we're inside or outside alternative education circles. Because, for example, in social conversations with, say, a neighbor, even now, or at the grocery store, when the school question came up, I very rarely use the word unschooling. So I was wondering, was that your experience too? Did you often talk about unschooling when you were out and about with the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely like you in those casual checkout conversations or, the neighbor or whatever, we just use homeschooling because basically, I feel like unschooling is a method of homeschooling in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
And so, but you would gauge, is this person more interested? Or if it's a homeschooling person, then I would often say unschooling so that they understood, because in that circle, they knew those differences. But yeah, we just used homeschooling as kind of general.
That was enough.
Yeah.
Like basically saying they're not in school.
Exactly.
Right. That was enough for most people that we were touching out and about in the world. But then when you're having a conversation, you're talking to people who already know homeschooling exists and you may be talking about homeschooling, then to, as you said, mention unschooling as the style or the method of homeschooling that we were choosing, then because in a conversation, it's meeting people where they are, right? So that you can best be understood. You're trying to communicate with someone, right? And understanding where they are helps your communication go most smoothly, I think, right?
And to some extent, I think that's maybe not the only purpose, but the most important purpose of the terminology. Like for our day-to-day life and living, I don't think about, we're unschooling today or we're doing, I don't think about it at all. But I think it helps in terms of communication. And I think it helps in terms of finding a community as well. So I think it has those purposes. And I think that's why this conversation is important too, to kind of understand those nuances.
That's such a great point because it's true. When I was looking for information online, it was amazing. I needed to use that, right?
Yes.
Yes. Definitely. And also a great point that I didn't often use the term at home in our family either, really right? There was no need to label what we were living. We were just doing our thing. It wasn't until they were older that it came up once or twice.
Exactly.
Because we didn't need to define it for what we were doing. That wasn't part of, I guess, just how we approached our days. It wasn't, when we were choosing to do something, when we were having conversations, it wasn't, is this unschooling? Is this? I didn't need to define it or label it within our family. We were looking at other things. We were looking at what we were interested in doing. We were looking at what our needs were that day, that week, that month, what our plans were. That was the language of our conversations. But when you're out, either talking to people or looking for information yourself, then it really is about the context, right? What terms you choose to use. Okay, so speaking of terms, lately the term self-directed education has been growing in use, and I suspect that's part of the Alliance for Self-Directed Education's work, which is wonderful that they're starting to reach more and more people. So I just wanted to pull this bit from their About page. The organizers of the Alliance recognize that there are many ways to practice and support self-directed education, including several varieties of self-directed education aligned schools, learning centers, and homeschooling. And by homeschooling or home-based self-directed education, they basically mean unschooling. I've heard Peter Gray talk about that. I'll find the link and put that in the show notes as well. But I have had some questions around this recently. things like, should we not be using the term unschooling? Should we call it self-directed education so that the term spreads wider? And, we're back to context again. But I think really understanding how all these terms fit together will really help us understand what we mean when we're using these terms. So basically, and I'll put this visual in the show notes for people, but I kind of think of it as two overlapping circles. So one circle is homeschooling, and the other circle is self-directed education. And where they overlap is unschooling. So unschooling is a style of homeschooling. Oh, look at that.
I'm just going to do that just so I hope that works. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's backwards.
Anna, I always, remember that. Oh, the podcast people. Anna held up the visual for the video. So if you're on YouTube, you just saw that. So unschooling is a style of homeschooling in that it's home or family based rather than school based, right? And it's also a style of self-directed education in that the child is free to choose what they want to do and learn rather than having to follow a curriculum. So, unschooling's got the home-based side of homeschooling, and it's got the self-directed learning side of self-directed education. So in my mind, that's how I see all these terms kind of fitting together. They're not synonyms of each other. Right? But they have an overlap. So I think that might be why it's really confusing and it can be hard, especially for newer people as they come and they hear all these terms bandied about, trying to figure out exactly, well, what is unschooling? What is unschooling?
Right.
Does that make sense to you, Anna?
Well, so yeah, I loved the visual because I feel like, again, I'm a visual person too, so I like to see how that
I always
together. And I also think it helps with those nuances, so that you can see these really are separate terms. There is some overlap, but the overlap even doesn't define it. Do you know what I mean? So it has its own aspects, but yet here's where it overlaps with these other terms that maybe we're more familiar with, or this newer term that's coming into the picture. How does it fit? Homeschooling's kind of been around a long time. We know that, but how does it fit there? So I love that because I think it's a great first start to understanding the nuances and the distinct differences, because there are distinct differences.
Yeah, I think that's one that, and I do love this. There's the challenge of understanding the terms, and people like to define the terms, but I also love seeing how the language has developed.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you talk to older unschoolers, but they use the term homeschooling because back when they began, homeschooling was the word for what we were doing. Right.
Right.
And it was eventually like so many, like I've had a number of guests on who call what they do and speak of what they do as homeschooling, even though when you look at what unschooling is, that's what they were doing. Right. And eventually John Holt found that there was enough of a distinction of people doing other styles inside the homeschooling label, if you want to call it that he said, oh, well, let's make a new term to describe what we're doing so that it's easier, again, for people to find information, for people to find each other, for people to connect, et cetera, to more quickly kind of define, I guess. Well, yeah.
Right. I think it helps with communication. I think it helps with conversations, and it gives that framework. And so I do. I think it's an important point.
In the last few years now, another term has come into the picture, radical unschooling, right? Mm-hmm. To further define within unschooling. And I think it's cool. What this means is there's more and more people in these areas, and there's more and more conversations, and, more and more people trying to connect and figure out. We love to place things and find patterns and stuff. And that's awesome. So that term has become more prevalent too over the years. So I thought it would be great for us just to take a moment and talk maybe about some of the differences between unschooling and radical unschooling.
Yeah, I think that is an important one because I feel like that term has caused questions for years now.
Yeah.
But we'll take a stab. So for me, what I feel like is we've talked about earlier, unschooling as a style or a method of homeschooling. And I feel like what radical unschooling is taking that self-directed aspect and moving it into sleep and food and play and parenting more, so it kind of takes it outside the educational realm and becomes more about the whole life. So, I think it's interesting. I mean, because I don't really consider it all that radical to treat humans as, treat children as human beings and to, live in harmony and figure out needs and that kind of stuff. But I think, I guess it was, and so that's kind of where that came. So we took this, people could, I guess, get more comfortably to the educational philosophy piece. And then they felt like, woo, we're making this radical leap to, talk to children about all of these things and for them to have, sovereignty over their body and all of these different pieces. And so I think that's where that term came in. And this, that for me personally, that's where I came up with consensual living. Like for me, consensual living was the umbrella. And then unschooling was our educational piece and how we lived with each other to meet needs and to communicate, and no punishing and no, top-down pieces became about that. And I mentioned that not to make it more complicated, but in some ways to say it is complicated.
Exactly.
There are different layers. So I'm not trying to, start a whole new thing, but that's the piece of it. So yeah, how was radical unschooling for you?
Well, yeah, that's a piece. And see, we definitely radical unschooled, and for me, I kind of have seen that as a journey. Because I found unschooling through the education piece, right?
Right.
And as we adopted that and I saw them learning, on their own and how well that worked. And for me, it just kind of gradually grew to incorporate more and more. Well, if they can choose this and they're learning so much by having the freedom to make those choices, how does it work when you relate it to choices around food? Like why are those choices different from other educational choices? So for me, it was more of a journey. So that's why this is not exploring radical unschooling. The podcast is exploring unschooling. Like if I'm in a bunch of unschoolers and having a conversation, I can, toss that up to more definitively explain what we do, but it's not something that I haven't taken that on in like normal conversation. When I talk about unschooling, I basically just use the term unschooling. And for me, I see it more as just kind of where people are on their unschooling journey. That's kind of the way, like you saw consensual living, I saw unschooling journey,
right. And I get that. And I wonder too, because this is another difference, like in our journeys, and we've seen it also mirrored on the podcast recently and actually in the past too, but basically coming from attachment parenting. Yeah. So in our culture, attachment parenting is probably viewed as radical, this idea of, connecting to your child and feeding them when they're hungry and, sleep cycles and all those different pieces. And so I think for those of us that came from that background, then it became, maybe that's why I don't see radical, that maybe that's why, I don't know, that there's a difference for me with that terminology. Yeah. But yes, we absolutely radical unschooled in the way that people talk about radical unschooling.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point too, because you can start with that, life parenting side,
right,
through attachment parenting. And then you're just adding in the education piece.
Right.
Again, it depends on your journey and where you started and the context of it. I love that. It's so individual, right? It really is individually about us, right? And our choices and just our learning and growing, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
So another term that sometimes gets used interchangeably with unschooling is child-led learning. I've seen that around for years as well. And, you totally get where they're coming from with that term, right? Because we're talking, free to choose, our children are choosing what they're doing and what they're learning, et cetera. But I think that can also lead to a lot of misunderstanding about how unschooling really works, right?
Yes. So this, I'm jumping in. I'm sorry, I'm talking over top of you because this one really is a problem because I think it causes so many misconceptions. I mean, and I think it leads to something that we've called, and maybe you hear it other places too, but like unparenting. And so, honestly, whenever I'm talking about unschooling, especially in a group of people that maybe are just getting first exposed to it or are kind of new to the idea, it is the first thing I throw out there, that this is not the lazy path, the easy path. This is not just kids leading the way and nobody's with them and doing that. Unschooling is engaged and connected and facilitatory. And I think that you lose those pieces of it when you just have that child led as the piece, as the term.
Yeah. As, the overarching description.
Right.
Yeah. Because exactly, you lose that whole piece of how the parent is involved.
Exactly.
So often we'll see people commenting, oh, I thought unschooling was more hands off. I was, supposed to kind of just sit back and wait for them to ask, I want to learn how to read now, Mom, or I want to learn math now. Life is not subjects. When you put child led in someone's mind, it's understandable that they think, oh, I should be kind of following along behind,
backseat,
keeping my hands off, not interfering, because they see any conversation, it leaves the impression that any conversation we have with them would be interfering with what path that they would choose. So I think, you lose that entire piece. And then that leads to, as you were talking about, what has been labeled as unparenting, which is when you're not connecting with them, when they're just making choices, and what you lose for the child also loses in that situation because they don't learn, they have no experience with, is a better way to put it, with the context of situations, of environments, of other people. There's this whole big picture of the world and how they navigate the world and how they understand the world, that if you're not there with them, it's so hard for them to pick up. It's so much harder for them to figure out that whole piece, figuring out, getting along with other people, figuring out how to engage with the world. Like it is harder on the child too. So it's not about it's the parent's journey to figure out how to engage with them without imposing. Right. Our own ideas or our own expectations on it. But that is the journey of unschooling and understanding how it works, right? Is figuring out how to be in a relationship.
Right. That's the journey for the parent, to figure out that nuance and those different pieces. But like you said, I mean, I don't think it serves a child to be placed out here with everyone in the background. Like I feel as humans, we are in community, that I feel like that's where we thrive, is in relationships and connections and feeding and growing off of each other. So it's not a one way. I think that's the other piece that maybe can be the misconception with the child led, is that we're all just looking at the child and letting them, go do this. In our family, and I know in yours too, we're learning from each other. It's this arrows all over the place. It's not this one straight path or this one direction. It's this, I'm learning from them. They're learning from me. We're learning from their dad. We're learning from the grandparents. We're learning from the community. And so it's so much more, circular than child-led would appear. And I think it ties people's hands when they hang on to that. Like you said, they're stepping back and maybe even holding back some impulses to be connected and involved because they think that's the right way to do it. And that's where I think the danger comes into play with that term. Because connect with your child, talk to them, be a part of them, learn together and grow together, because that to me is the beauty of unschooling.
Mm-hmm. Because, and so not only in figuring out the world, you use the term facilitating before. Awesome way to describe how we help our kids. Because if we're not connecting with them, we're not gaining enough information to help facilitate what they're trying to pursue. So not only is it more challenging with relationships and figuring out the world, the learning that they're doing may not be jumping forward, and the things that they're interested in pursuing and trying to accomplish just may not happen as quickly because they don't have other people with them, have us with them to facilitate that, to help them with things. It's like the whole picture. So, you understand where it came from in that, yes, sure, we're facilitating our child as they follow their interests, right? But when that becomes a focus, there's just so much that's implied in there that can get in the way of unschooling fully, for unschooling to thrive, right?
Right. And I think you're right. Maybe that came from people leaving the traditional school environment where you have, teacher imparting knowledge or, curriculum giving you this one path that's coming this way. So it's like, no, we want to stop that. We want to go this way. Yeah. But again, I think the reality of unschooling is the swirl of learning and growing.
Yeah, no, I love that.
For those in the podcast.
Your hands are flying everywhere. But yeah, I always love to describe unschooling as swirling.
Yeah.
Our lives are swirling and we're finding connections and we're moving forward and it's always like little steps and then maybe pivoting, sure, because that curriculum really is like a straight path. Whatever the path is, it's like you follow this, you follow this. And child-led can really leave the impression that it's another straight path, just following the child instead of the curriculum. Whereas the swirl of unschooling and of connection and of seeing where you are, seeing the context of the moment, knowing what you're trying to accomplish, and using that to choose your next step is a much better description of what it's like.
I think so. I do. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another term that I've heard that can be confusing for people, I've often heard democratic schools, like those based on the Sudbury model, referred to as unschooling schools. And again, you can understand where they were coming from with that term because there is a commonality in that they both fit under that self-directed education umbrella, like we talked about before, but they really aren't synonymous. They are definitely two distinct learning environments, right? And I do think it's really helpful to understand the differences. So I would like to chat a little bit about that. How do you see the differences?
I mean, I see big differences, but I think the important piece for me is around the relationships. So I think one of the benefits, and you'll hear it time and time again, you have in your podcast, with people when you're asking them what's your favorite part or what was the surprise or what was the, whatever, it's the relationships, because the relationships that we're able to develop with unschooling, there really is no other. It's time, it's exposure, it's the day to day with each other, it's the getting to know each other and all of those different pieces. And not only the relationship that you have with your child, but the relationship your child has with their siblings, if there are siblings, and those type of things, those taking place in our family home. And then as we branch out into the community is so different than, what would happen in a school environment, even if it's Sudbury. And I think the other big difference, and then I want to hear what you have to say and we'll keep talking, but it's this idea that there is a place of learning. And I'm not even sure they think of it that way. I don't even think, because they're excited about, it's, the children are leading the way. But you're physically taking children to a place and saying, this is where you're going to learn and figure out these pieces. And what I love about unschooling, again, like we talked about earlier, we're not talking about that at home. We're just doing it. Learning is happening at midnight. It's happening at 7 a.m. It's happening when we're walking in the forest. It's happening when we're in a big city. It's happening all the time. So there's not this idea of going somewhere to then acquire knowledge. So those would be kind of the two big pieces for me, but tell me what you're thinking.
Well, yes, I want to dive deep into those. The location piece is big. And you know what? I think it really has to do with where the parent is on their journey, right? Because it depends on how they see learning. their child goes to Sudbury school during the day, yet, learning continues in the evenings and all around, they still see the learning that happens everywhere. They just happen to do it at the Sudbury school or the Democratic school, or the learning center or whatever during these certain hours. But I think that is, and we're back to choice, right? We're back to understanding your child, what works for them, understanding what works for your family, right? and have, if you've got these options available, right? But for some kids, that isn't a good fit, right? Having to go out to a different place during certain hours, and that, again, I believe that varies by school and learning center, but they need some attendance, right? So that is a piece that you're adding to it. And that's a difference, right? One way or the other. That's just a difference between unschooling and having to be at a physical location.
Yeah.
Right.
And possibly expectations, wouldn't you think? I mean, I feel like even though there's free flowing and they're this and they're whatever, I mean, there is somewhat of an expectation that you're coming there and that you're going to spark into something that's interesting, or you're going to get a group together to look at something or do. And so again, that expectation on a timetable, I think, is maybe where I feel like is a big difference. With unschooling, I feel like we don't have that timetable expectations. Things bubble up in different ways and very organically. But I do agree with you that thrilled that these options are out there, because I think they are so helpful to families to have choices that are in different situations. And I think also sometimes for kids that have been in school for a long time, having this little bit of structure that's familiar, and yet this ability to kind of branch off and take control of that themselves is a really comfortable way to do that. So thrilled that these options are out there, but don't love that they're calling it unschooling.
Yeah. It's not an unschooling.
It's not the same.
What's the commonality is the self-directed learning piece.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's the piece. It's the learning side. And that leads so nicely into the point you were talking about the relationships with unschooling, and when I came to it, it was about replacing school. Right. That was my first piece, because that's what we were doing. We were leaving. It's like, okay, they're not going to school anymore. I need to replace that with what? How am I going to do that? Right. So we all know my story, that I started in that education piece. But yes, as I came to see their learning, as I came to understand learning better, that relationship piece bubbled up more. I came to realize that if I focused on the relationship and staying connected and, just being in solid relationship with them, and working through things together, the learning just followed. And I eventually didn't need to think about the learning at all. Right. The relationship became the forefront, became what we focused on. And like you mentioned, that can be a little bit more challenging, definitely be more challenging if you're not spending that time with them, if you're not seeing what they're doing, if you're not having those conversations with them. Now, at these locations, they have adults there, they have peers there, et cetera. But it's not the relationship with the parent, with the siblings, and they only have that for those few hours, for the hours when they're not at the building, right? So it does make it more challenging to develop those and to maintain them, because you don't have all these little clues, because then it becomes harder to facilitate them ourselves, right? It is kind of saying, okay, most of your learning is happening there, even though it's under your control, it's self-directed, it's outside of the family versus inside.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess the other piece for me that I came to see over the years was how important that safety that feeling of safety in the family was.
Okay.
And I'm sure that you can find that in other locations, but it's harder because you're not as close. Like now you're trying to develop really close relationships in two different places, right? And the safety to be able to, do things and fail, because failing is a huge part of learning, right? And to be in a safe spot where you don't feel like you're going to be ridiculed, or even just feel embarrassed. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Because I think there's an unconditionality to our family lives. This unconditional love and connection piece that we develop with unschooling is this beautiful base with which to launch ideas and thoughts and, journeys and pieces. And I think that while a school you can certainly develop relationships and there can be beautiful people, mentors and things there. And that's lovely. I think it is very different. And I think that what I like about unschooling is that so we have this base, we have this unconditional love, these connections, these relationships, and we can still have mentors and community and people outside, but we have this home base. And so for me, it worked better for my family to have the home base be home and unschooling, and then we branch out versus going somewhere else and having that be the focus.
Yeah. Well, and then there is that location constraint in that, we could go out anywhere at any time during the day. We could, versus having to try and have, maybe supplies there or arrange trips, etc. There was some more freedom of movement, maybe is what I'm going for. You know what I mean? That we could just pick up and quickly go wherever we wanted at the time.
I think another thing that is helpful with unschooling, and I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but I feel it flows with life more maybe because it doesn't have a schedule, and the Sudbury schools that I'm familiar with, it's not exactly, you still need to go there. You have to go there a certain amount of time. You can kind of make that time look like you want to within their framework, but there's still a certain amount of time you have to go. But I think with unschooling, I'm thinking of times in our life when my dad was dying and in hospice, and we were, as a family coming together to tend to that moment, and how rich and special and filled with learning and love and amazement that was. And I think that that's something that unschooling allows us, to flow with life, whether it's something that is challenging like that, or something that's, oh my gosh, we have an opportunity to go spend a month in Italy, or to do whatever, we have these different opportunities. And I think I like how it gave us that freedom over the years.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of takes us back to, I'm back to that diagram, right? Of those two overlapping circles. And it really is, what is important to you and your family and your choices and your circumstances and all that kind of stuff. Because with unschooling, there's that homeschooling piece where that home and that family connection, relationships, family-based freedom to do things is important, right? Is that your overriding or your overarching kind of goal, a choice for choosing this alternative lifestyle, right? Or is it the learning piece, right? The self-directed piece? Is that the most important thing for you? Because then maybe, a Sudbury style school, a Democratic style school fits well for your circumstances, right? If that's kind of the most important piece. And it's not a judgment as to which, for you and I and other people who have chosen unschooling for a long time over the years, that has been the family-based side has been the most important piece, right?
Right. So I'm interested in that just a little bit more too, because I think, and maybe this will help people see how individual it is.
Yes.
So to really look inside, because when you were saying that, I was like, yes, I know why we made the choice we did. And those that have heard me on the podcast before know that, I had a child that was hospitalized at birth for an extended period of time, wasn't expected to survive. Even when we got out, wasn't expected to survive long after that. And absolutely, our choice, my husband and my choice, was we are going to live every day with this child and with each other and in joy and community and love, and as long as we can. Like, that was everything that mattered to us. And that really we just kept doing that. We just kept doing that and making that choice. And so the education to me is so secondary, because what I saw with both my kids is that was taking care of itself. They were learning and doing and whatever, but it was that connection with each other and with our family and with our extended family and with our community that I wanted to be the priority in our lives, because I feel like we can learn things. We are meant to learn as humans. We're meant to learn. And I think we're meant to be in relationship, but I think that takes some practice sometimes. And so I think that giving that opportunity to be in community and relationship like that has served my kids so much as they've grown into their adulthood, way more than a workbook or a cool project or a whatever would have done, And so, but again, I think you're right. It's so individual. So it's all about that individual's journey. So I think those watching that are considering the different options, just look inside and talk to each other and figure out as a family, like, what are our priorities and what are we looking for here? Because there are so many amazing opportunities out there now. So yeah, not one right way at all, but you'll find your right way, I think, if you look inside.
I love that. Because so it made me think about, because I found homeschooling, I brought them home. And yes, for me, I discovered the relationships that we developed became my highest priority. Right. But I did also, in my will, et cetera, or telling other people, the self-directed learning part was very important to me. But the relationships were more important. But, I said, if I pass away, or Rocco and I pass away, there was a Democratic school. It was a little bit further from us, but, that would be my next choice, because that was my prioritization, right? Because the relationships and the family, and like you said, the learning follows all of that. But if something happened with that was my other choice. Absolutely. And not to say that needs to be a backup or anything like that. Like you said, you're figuring out what works best. You know what? For some people, maybe the relationships are really challenging. When you're working through things, because there is a lot of personal work to get to that, developing those kinds of relationships with our children, right? It is a lot of work for us to do to get there. And, and maybe our child really likes a big group, to hang out and loves learning that way. And some kids don't. That large numbers of people are overwhelming, having to go to a place on a certain schedule. Maybe those things are challenging. So yeah, like you were saying, it's all about figuring out what are our priorities, what works for us as individuals, our strengths, weaknesses, the things we like, the situations that we like, how we like to learn, like all of that comes in and bubbles up. And like that swirl that we were talking about, it's not one path or the other. These things are all part of the swirl of our lives and figuring ourselves out and how we want to put our lives together, right?
And I think something you said very early on was, and it can change. So I think that's really important. So I think make the decisions when you're figuring out how I want to word this, but like when you're thinking about these decisions and you're looking at it, make the decisions based on what's best for you right now, and knowing that can change. Because I think sometimes that's a stumbling block for people. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, well, this seems so great now and everything's going so great now, but I don't know if it's going to work forever. So we're not going to do it at all. Yeah. And it's like, no, you can change, so if it's working for you right now, do it. And you may find, like Pam and I did, that it just kept growing and working and was amazing. Or you may find, here we're at a different stage. They have some different needs. They're going to be served by these particular mentors or by this particular peer group. Great. Because again, no one right answer, no one straight path, but don't So don't stretch that too far out in the future. Just look at what works right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And to add on to that, realizing that things can change, don't feel fixed. That's something,
Yes.
right? Like I chose unschooling,
Yes.
let's say, and it's not working well, but I will look bad. Like we carry that baggage. Like when I talked about how a lot of it is our journey, like I made this choice. I have to make this work.
No.
Right. When maybe it really isn't maybe right now the best fit for your family with your circumstances, with whatever's going on.
Yep.
Right. To lose that piece or work through that piece where we feel like the right or wrong judgment that I made this choice, so I have to make it work no matter what. Right. That's why I talk about even when families are choosing school, realizing that you're choosing school, wow, like the weight that can come off with just knowing this is the choice right now. I don't have to buy into I don't have to bring it home. This is just what works well for our family right now. And we'll see, in 6 months, we'll see what we'll just see.
And I was going to say the same thing, in that just knowing your options, just understanding what's happening at these different places, at the Democratic schools, at homeschooling families, unschooling families, all of that, just knowing that gives you so much more power and information to then create what you need, be it in the structure of a school, be it in the structure of a Democratic school, be it in the structure of your own home. So that's why I just feel like this knowledge and these nuances and all these things are so important, because it gives you all these tools and information to create the perfect situation for you and to adjust as you need to. So I just, such a critical point, I think.
Yeah. Because, understanding it all is not about choosing the label. It's not about saying, oh, I'm homeschooling, I'm unschooling, I'm doing this alternative education. But it's about our understanding about our choices.
Yes.
I think it's about getting more, when you're understanding the differences, the nuances, as you said, you're better understanding your options. You're better. It's asking you to better learn how people learn. It's asking you to better understand your child. It's asking you to better understand your priorities. Like there is no downside to better understanding all the nuances between all
whatever choice you make.
Yeah.
Exactly. No downside. And so it's just an important discussion to have in your families and to have with your friends and to talk it through, because as you're talking through those pieces, I think what you'll see is that your priorities will start bubbling up. Your things and also some baggage may bubble up. So there may be some things you need to kind of sort out. Okay, is this about me? Is this about them? And, I think I've talked about this before, when they get into teenage years, suddenly, I think because it's a time we remember more strongly as adults, that we're right back in it. We're feeling some of the pressure we may have felt. And so, I think all these discussions do bubble up some things from our past. So, but that's a great time to look at it, sort it out, set it aside, and then refocus back on the family you have now that's in front of you and what would serve you all the best. So there's just so much great, I think, learning and growth through this process. Is one of the other side benefits, of unschooling, is just how we learn more about ourselves and how we can realize that we're the creators of our own story. So I love that.
I love that. That was just a beautiful place to take it. Like, our self-awareness grows insanely because it needs to, for us to, so not only understand ourselves, but understand the world better, understand our family better. And like you said, we are the creators of our family's lives, understanding that we have that power and those choices. It's everything, isn't it? Right? You are the creator of your life. And your family's life. Okay. All right. I hope we hit things for you guys. You're welcome to comment on the episode if you have questions. But I think this was a great start to bring some context, because I love that there are more and more opportunities, more and more choices. Absolutely. But yes, that's more and more for us to figure out. It gives us more information about the possibilities, right? That's just more possibilities that can bubble up. But
Yeah.
again,
And they don't have to be competing. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. It doesn't have to be a one is better than the other. It's just, I think if we can just go back to the individuals and the families and, let's just find what works best and know that that may change at any given time. Like that just feels better to me than pitting the different methods against each other or different, it's just not necessary. It's not necessary at all.
No, it's not necessary at all. And then there's the whole piece about, when people, it's so easy, especially as you're learning things, to feel defensive. When people are explaining things, it can feel like an attack, right? When people saying, no, with unschooling, there's X, Y, and Z, and when an experienced unschooling parent is talking about that, they're talking about the roots, the fundamentals of it. That's another piece I guess we could hit on, the language, right? Because the language means different things depending on where you are in your journey. Like when you tell somebody new that our kids don't have bedtimes, the picture that creates in their mind is entirely different than the picture of the person who said that.
Yes.
But it's true, right?
Oh yeah. When I would say no, my kids are now, they're 19 and 21 have never been punished. That's just not people are like, what? How did you do that? But when you're in that life, it just flows when you're talking to each other and communicating and solving problems together. But yeah, so the language and some of those little snippets are kind of hard for people to take out of context and may need more information, but that's the beauty of the journey too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, if you feel defensive, it's not that they're trying, I certainly don't believe, and when I'm talking, I certainly don't mean anyone to feel like they're being attacked, to feel like, your definition is wrong. We're all learning, right? We're all sharing our experiences, sharing our insights, learning more about it. Like I continue to learn. That's part of what I love about doing the podcast, hearing other people's experiences. I love sharing that kind of stuff. But it's great and helpful to understand that when we're new to these ideas, it can feel maybe a bit of an attack, like, oh, you're not doing unschooling right, or you're not doing that. No, they're really trying to communicate so that you can better understand. If you take it with that view, it's not a competition between any choices. It's helping you better understand those choices so that you can play around with them in your family. Swirl them in, try them out, see what works for you, see what connects with you. Right. Like for me, it's like, what makes the most sense?
Yes.
What is the next little step? And it doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, I've chosen unschooling and I need to run there as fast as I can.
Right. No.
It's not rules of unschooling, anything like that. It's okay. This next baby step to understanding, oh, gee, they're asking about different food things, or they're asking about math, and they're not going to, math subjects that's another whole paradigm shift, right? As you're learning about unschooling and learning how people learn and the dividing the world in subjects. It's a beautiful journey. But yes.
And we've seen it play out with so many people where they do those baby steps and then they are really like, oh my gosh, this really changed things. This is really changing the energy of my house. This is really changing all of these different pieces. And some of these things that they were worried about or things that weren't taking care of themselves, suddenly, okay, it's falling into place now because we're working together. So, I think just being aware and having those conversations with yourself and with your family and thinking about it will just lead you to a beautiful place, really, again, no matter where you end up or what you end up trying and doing, because it's that awareness and that understanding that just, leads so much beauty to the journey.
Yep. We are the creators. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Anna. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks. And we'll probably have more. So I am hoping people will ask questions or can start a conversation because we can talk about it some more.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So I hope this was helpful, a good start, a little bit more context to some of the terminology that comes up in conversations and just more fodder, right? More fun.
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Have a wonderful day, Anna.
Bye.